This lecture is part of an online course on category theory and will be about adjoint functors. So adjoint functors are one of the basic concepts of category theory that were not originally discovered by Eilenberg and MacLean. They were originally discovered by Kahn in the late 1950s. And we will start with an example of adjoint functors. So let's start with the category of groups and the category of sets. And there are two functors between these. First of all, there's G, which is the forgetful functor. You just take a group and forget it's a group and look at the underlying set. Given a set S, what we can do is we can form a functor F called the free group functor, which just takes any set S and turns it into the free group on that set. And these functors are certainly not inverses of each other in any sense. What they are adjoints of each other. And to understand what this means, let's pick a group H and a set S, and let's think about maps from the set S to the underlying set of H. So this can be described in two ways. First of all, it's the same as a map from a set S to the underlying set of H. So we just apply the forgetful functor to H. On the other hand, if we take the free group on S, then any map from S to a group extends to a homomorphism of groups from the free group on S to H. So what we have are three sets here, and these are all naturally isomorphic. So this set here is just the morphisms from F of S to H. This is in the category of groups, whereas this set, the set of these morphisms here are the morphisms from S to G of H in the category of sets. And what we want is a natural isomorphism, or what we have is a natural isomorphism between these two functors. So I'll recall what a natural isomorphism means in a moment, but informally you can just think of it as being the morphisms here can be sort of identified with the morphisms in that direction. And now we use this to motivate the general definition of an adjoint functor. So suppose we take two categories A and B, and we have functors G and F going between them. Then we say that these are adjoint if the morphisms from FB to A in the category A can be identified with the morphisms from B to G of A in the category B. So this is in B and this is in A. And this is going to be a natural isomorphism. So if we're given a natural isomorphism like that, which I'll explain in a moment, then we say F is left adjoint to G, and G is right adjoint to F. If you've got a functor, then the left adjoint, if it exists, is almost unique. Any two left adjoints of a functor are there's a natural isomorphism between them. So although the left adjoint of a functor isn't unique, it's sort of unique for all practical purposes. It need not exist, of course, but if it does exist, it's essentially unique. And similarly, right adjoints are unique. So we can sort of talk about the left adjoint and the right adjoint of a functor, although we have to remember that's not quite correct. Incidentally, the name adjoint comes from linear algebra. So if you've got a vector space V over a field, let's give it a bilinear form, a non-degenerate bilinear form to K, just to make things simple. Then if you've got a linear operator F on V, it has an adjoint which can be defined by saying FB, the inner product of FB and A is the same as the inner product of B and G of A. So this says the linear operator G is adjoint to the linear operator F. And if you compare this expression with this expression, and you compare this expression with this expression, you see they're formally very similar. So that's where the name adjoint for adjoint functor comes from. It's formally quite similar to adjoints of maps in linear algebra. Now I said I was going to explain exactly what natural means. So here we're trying to compare morphisms from FB to A to morphisms from B to G of A. And we want this identification to be natural, and what that means is it behaves well with respect to morphisms of A and B. So let's just write this out explicitly. So first of all, if we have a morphism from A1 to A2, then we can have the following diagram. We have morphisms from FB to A1, and this should be isomorphic to morphisms from B to GA1. And we also have morphisms from FB to A2, and this should be isomorphic to morphisms from B to GA2. And the morphism from A1 to A2 induces morphisms like that. And the condition we want for this to be natural in A is that this square should be commutative. And we should also have a similar condition depending on morphisms of B1 to B2, but there's one little thing you've got to be careful of, so I'll just write this out and then explain what you have to watch out for. So we have morphisms from FB1 to A, and these should be isomorphisms from morphisms to B to G of A. We have morphisms from FB2 to A, and this should be isomorphic to the morphisms from B2 to F of G2 to, that should be G of A. And now the one thing you've got to be careful of is that if you've got a morphism from B1 to B2, you don't get a map from here to here, you get a map going in the other direction. So the only thing to watch out for is make sure you get the directions of these arrows right, and this diagram of course should also be commutative. And you may be wondering, how do you remember this rather complicated, messy looking condition? And the answer is you don't bother remembering it, because in practice any reasonable isomorphism between these two sets here will sort of more or less automatically satisfy these two conditions in practice, and I certainly don't bother checking these conditions whenever I've got a pair of adjoint functors, and I suspect most people don't bother either. I mean, they're actually rather easy to check and nearly always satisfied, so there's no need to remember them too carefully. So now let's give some examples of adjoint functors. There are loads of examples that look like this. You've got a functor C, and there's a forgetful functor to some functor D, so some category D, and going in the other direction there's some sort of free functor going back from D to C. The concepts of forgetful functor and free functor don't really have a precise definition, but it's kind of, in practice, usually obvious what you mean by saying a functor is forgetful or free. So let's give several examples of these. So here we're going to list the category C and the category D. So if the category C is groups and sets, then the forgetful functor is the obvious one, and the free functor here just takes a set to the free group. You can do a variation like take abelian groups here, and then you'll get the free abelian group if you do the same thing. If you take C to be rings, let's take it to be commutative rings, and D to be sets again, then there's a forgetful functor from rings to sets, and the corresponding free function just takes the polynomial ring on a set. So if you've got a set with 3 elements, you'll take the polynomial ring over Z with 3 generators. If you've done Lie algebras, you know there's a forgetful functor from Lie algebras to rings, where sorry, I got it the wrong way round. It goes from rings to Lie algebras, where you define the Lie algebra bracket by AB equals AB minus BA. And then the corresponding free functor just takes a Lie algebra to the universal enveloping algebra of the Lie algebra, which is a sort of universal ring generated by the Lie algebra. Slightly less obvious example, let's take C to be complete metric spaces. and let's take D to be metric spaces. So your forgetful functor is doing even less work than the usual forgetful functor, that it just takes a complete metric space to itself and you just sort of forget the fact that it's complete. Seems kind of a rather trivial thing to do. But the corresponding free functor, or the left adjoint, I don't think this is really called a free metric space, turns out to be the completion of a metric space. It just takes a metric space to a complete metric space. Here this is a special case of adjoint functors where the category here is actually a subcategory of the category there. A final example, if you take fields, then you can forget that it's a field and just take this to an integral domain, and the corresponding left adjoint functor to this is just the field of quotients of an integral domain. So you see, adjoints are rather remarkable because you can take things like the free group, the polynomial ring, the universal enveloping algebra, the Lie algebra, the completion of a metric space, or the field of quotients. And these all look like completely different constructions. But from the point of view of category theory, you can give a uniform definition that works for all of these. You just take a left adjoint of a suitable forgetful functor. So it's really unifying a lot of apparently completely different examples. You can also have functors that have a left adjoint and a right adjoint, and I will now give some examples of this. So let's take G to be a group, and I'm going to look at the category of G sets and the category of sets. So a G set is just going to be a set acted on by the group G. And now if you're given a set S, there's an obvious way to get a G set. You can just take S with a trivial action. And that turns any set into a set acted on by G in a not terribly interesting way. So this has a left adjoint and a right adjoint. So if you've got a G set S, there are two ways of getting a set out of it. First of all, we can take X to XG, which is the set of fixed points of X under G. Alternatively, we can take X to the set of orbits of X under G. Now, one of these two functors is a left adjoint of this functor here, and the other one is a right adjoint. And I'm not going to tell you which is which, partly because I'm leaving it as an exercise, but the real reason is that if I tell you, there's a pretty good chance I'll get it the wrong way round, because I always get confused about this. There's actually a second way to find a triplet of functors, one of which is a left adjoint and one of which is a right adjoint. Here, if I take a G set X, I can just forget that it's got a G action on it. So I can just apply the obvious forgetful functor and get set S X, where I've just forgotten that it's got a G action. And now there are two ways of, well, there are I shouldn't say two ways, I should say there are yet more ways of turning a set S into a set acted on by G. We can take a set S to G times S, and G acts on G and acts on this bit trivially, so that gives you a G set. Yes, another thing you can do is you can take a set S and you can take the set of all functions from G to S. And this is also acted on by G because G acts on itself, so it acts on functions to S. And as before, one of these two functors is left adjoint to this forgetful functor and the other is right adjoint, and as another exercise you can work out which of these is left adjoint and which is right adjoint. So there are loads of pairs of adjoint functors. Another obvious example of a pair of adjoint functors is if you've got an equivalence of categories, then this gives you two functors between these categories, and these functors are left adjoints to each other and they're also right adjoints to each other. So a functor can be a left adjoint and a right adjoint of the same functor if you've got an equivalence. There's one amazingly useful property of adjoint functors, which is that right adjoint functors always preserve limits and left adjoint functors always preserve colimits. So this will be part of the subject of the next lecture, where I will be explaining what limits and colimits are.